The biggest clue about what the silo really is may have been hiding in the one place nobody was supposed to question. The mirror. Not the cameras. Not the outside. Not even the mysterious technology controlling the silo. The mirror. Because if our theory is correct, that mirror was never just showing a reflection. It was showing us a warning about how the entire silo system works. And once you notice what the show keeps doing with reflections, hidden rooms, sealed spaces, and the information people are allowed to see, one terrifying possibility begins to emerge. The silo may not simply be controlling what its people see. It may be controlling what they believe is real. But here's what changes everything. If the mirror is connected to that idea, then the question is no longer, what is hiding outside the silo? The real question becomes, what has been hidden inside the people living there? And this is where it gets darker. Because the silo's greatest weapon has never been the walls. It has been perception. Think about the way information works inside this world. People are not simply forbidden from learning certain things. They are trained to stop looking. Certain objects are suspicious. Certain questions are dangerous. Certain memories are treated like threats. And certain pieces of technology are allowed to exist only when they serve the system. That distinction matters. Because a prison does not need to physically lock every door if it can convince the prisoners that opening the door is unthinkable. That is exactly why the mirror becomes so interesting. A mirror gives you information, but only a limited kind. It shows you what is directly in front of it. It cannot show you what is behind you. It cannot show you what exists outside its frame. And most importantly, it can make you believe you are seeing the complete picture when you are actually seeing only a carefully limited version of reality. Look at what the show is actually telling us. The people of the silo constantly live inside controlled perspectives. They see screens. They see surveillance. They see official records. They see what authority allows them to see. But they rarely know what exists beyond the frame. That is not accidental world building. That is the central psychological mechanism of the silo. And the mirror may represent it perfectly. This is the detail everyone missed. A system as powerful as the silo does not need to create a fake reality from beginning to end. That would be almost impossible. Instead, it only needs to control which pieces of reality people are allowed to connect. That is much more powerful. Give someone 10 true facts. Hide the 11th. And you can completely change the conclusion they reach. That is how the silo can remain believable. The people don't have to be surrounded by obvious lies. They can be surrounded by fragments of truth. And that explains something much deeper about the characters. Why do so many intelligent people accept explanations that, from the outside, seem incomplete? Because they are not stupid. They are operating with missing information. And missing information is more dangerous than a lie. A lie can eventually be exposed. But if you remove the evidence needed to connect two truths, the victim may never realize they were manipulated. This is why the mirror matters. It represents a world where people can see something real and still misunderstand what they are seeing. But there is another layer. This is where the theory becomes much more disturbing. Throughout the silo story, memory and identity are treated as things that can be controlled. People have personal histories. They have emotional attachments. They have knowledge. But the system determines how much of that knowledge can survive. And that creates a terrifying possibility. What if the silo's greatest secret isn't simply something hidden in a room? What if it is hidden in people's minds? Because think about the consequences. If you erase someone's access to certain information, you don't need to physically destroy the truth. You only need to destroy their connection to it. That person can continue living, continue working, continue loving people, continue believing they understand their world. And yet they can become incapable of discovering the thing that would destroy the system. That is far more sophisticated than ordinary censorship. And it could explain why certain characters become so dangerous the moment they begin connecting unrelated clues. They are not dangerous because they discover one secret. They become dangerous because they begin building the complete picture. That is the one thing the silo cannot allow if the system controls perception. Why leave mirrors at all? Why allow people to see themselves? Why allow reflections? Why allow anything that encourages someone to question what they're looking at? Because perhaps the mirror is harmless. Or perhaps it is the opposite. Perhaps the system knows something about human psychology that everyone else has forgotten. People usually trust their own eyes. If you look into a mirror and see yourself, you don't immediately ask whether the reflection is real. You assume it is. And that assumption is exactly what makes the metaphor so powerful. The silo wants its people to trust what they see. Not because everything they see is false, but because everything they see is incomplete. That difference could explain almost every major mystery surrounding the silo. The outside, the forbidden technology, the records, the hidden structures, the people who suddenly become threats, the strange inconsistencies. All of them may be pieces of the same design. Not a machine designed simply to imprison people. A machine designed to control their understanding of reality. And if that is true, then Juliet's greatest advantage is not her ability to build machines. It is her refusal to accept the frame. She keeps looking where she is told not to look. She keeps asking why. She keeps noticing contradictions. And that makes her uniquely dangerous. Because once someone realizes that the picture has been deliberately framed, they stop trusting the picture. And once you stop trusting the picture, the entire silo begins to look different. The walls stop looking like protection. The rules stop looking like safety. The records stop looking like history. And the mirror stops looking like a mirror. It becomes evidence. Evidence that somebody has been deciding what everyone is allowed to see. But here's where the theory reaches its darkest point. If the silo has been controlling perception for generations, then who decided what reality should look like in the first place? Because someone had to create the rules. Someone had to decide which memories were dangerous. Someone had to decide what information could survive. Someone had to decide what people were allowed to believe. And if that person is still connected to the system, then the greatest secret of season May 3rd not be what is behind the walls. It may be who is standing behind the reflection. And if the mirror is telling us anything, it is this: you can stare directly at the truth and still never see what is standing behind you. There is a moment when this theory stops being about symbolism and starts becoming something much more dangerous. Because if the mirror represents controlled perception, then we have to reconsider what the silo's authorities actually fear. They don't seem to fear people knowing that the world is dangerous. They fear people discovering why they were never allowed to know the truth for themselves. That is a completely different problem. Look at the difference. If the outside world is genuinely deadly, then the rules make sense. Keep people underground. Control information. Prevent panic. Protect the population. But if the authorities are manipulating what people see, what they remember, and what evidence they are allowed to access, then the explanation becomes much darker. Because now we have to ask, what are they protecting people from? The outside? Or the truth about the silo itself? That question changes everything. And this is where Juliet becomes so important. Juliet does not behave like someone searching for a simple answer. She behaves like someone who has realized the answers themselves have been engineered. Every time she discovers something, another contradiction appears. Every explanation creates another question. And normally, that would make the mystery harder. But in the silo, contradictions may actually be the clues. Because a perfectly controlled system should not contradict itself. Unless the contradictions are evidence that different layers of the system were created for different purposes. Think about it. One layer controls daily life. Another controls information. Another controls technology. Another controls history. And perhaps another controls the perception of reality itself. That would mean the silo is not one system. It is a system inside another system. And the people living there may only understand the outermost layer. That is why discovering one secret never seems to be enough. Every door leads to another door. Every answer reveals another mechanism. Every forbidden object points towards something older. This is not the structure of a normal mystery. It is the structure of a controlled environment. A maze. And the most effective maze is not the one with the most walls. It is the one where the prisoner doesn't realize the walls are moving. Now think about something even more important. A mirror shows you a reflection. A camera records an image. But neither one gives you reality itself. They give you a representation. That distinction may be the hidden language of the silo. Because the people inside the silo are constantly surrounded by representations, screens, records, official histories, surveillance, visual evidence, instructions, stories about the outside. They are constantly being told, this is what reality looks like. But what if the system has always understood that people will trust an image more easily than an explanation? That would explain the importance of visual evidence. If someone tells you the outside is dangerous, you can question them. But if you see something that appears to prove it, your brain immediately wants to believe your eyes. That is why the cleaning ritual is so psychologically powerful. The person goes outside. They see one version of the world. They experience another. And the audience is forced to question which version is real. The brilliance of the mystery is that the problem isn't simply whether the image is fake. The deeper question is, who controls the image? And that is exactly what the mirror theory points toward. The silo doesn't necessarily need to create a completely fake world. It only needs to control the interface between humans and reality. That could be the real purpose of the entire system, not merely hiding the truth,
controlling access to it.
And once you understand that, one character becomes much more suspicious. Bernard. Because Bernard's power has never come from physical strength. It comes from information. He knows things other people don't. He understands systems other people cannot see. He knows when something is dangerous before everyone else understands why. And that makes him more than an administrator. He represents the human face of a system that understands information as power. But here's what changes everything. Bernard may not be the person who designed the entire system. He may simply be another reflection. A person who believes he understands the machinery because he has been allowed to see one layer deeper than everyone else. And if that is true, then Bernard himself may be trapped inside the same illusion. He thinks he is controlling the silo. But perhaps the silo is controlling him. This is where Juliet's story becomes much more complicated. We usually think of rebellion as destroying the system. But Juliet's real threat is different. She investigates.
She tests.
She builds. She observes. She refuses to accept an explanation simply because someone powerful gives it to her. That makes her dangerous because she is learning to distinguish between evidence and interpretation. And that is exactly what the silo wants to prevent. Consider how easy it would be to manipulate someone who accepts every image as proof. Show them a dangerous outside. They believe the outside is dangerous. Show them a record. They believe the record is complete. Show them an official history. They believe history has not been altered. But someone like Juliet asks the question nobody else wants to ask. What was removed? That may be the single most important question in the entire silo mystery. Not what did they show us? What did they deliberately leave out? Because a missing piece can be more revealing than a visible one. And this may explain the repeated emphasis on forbidden objects and hidden technology. These objects matter because they survived outside the approved narrative. They are physical evidence that something existed before the current version of history. And physical evidence is dangerous. You can argue with a memory. You can manipulate a story. You can rewrite a document. But an object can sit in front of you and refuse to disappear. That is why old technology could be more threatening than a rebellion. A rebellion can be crushed. A piece of evidence can spread. One person can discover it. Then another. Then another. And suddenly the official story begins collapsing. Now imagine the silo from the perspective of the people who built it. If they knew society had a dangerous tendency to destroy itself when confronted with overwhelming information, perhaps they designed a system where truth would be released in controlled doses. That sounds almost reasonable. Until you realize what happens when the people controlling those doses become corrupted. The original safety mechanism becomes a prison. The people forget why the rules existed. The rules become traditions. Traditions become laws. Laws become fear. And eventually nobody remembers which parts were necessary and which parts were created simply to preserve power. That may be the real tragedy of the silo. Perhaps the system was not originally designed to lie forever. Perhaps it was designed to survive long enough for humanity to recover. But somewhere along the way, survival became control. And control became the objective. That would explain why the silo feels so old, why the truth seems buried under generations of procedures, why people protect rules they no longer understand, and why discovering the original purpose of the silo could be more dangerous than escaping it. Because if the original purpose was something completely different from what people believe today, then the entire civilization has been built on a misunderstanding. And there is one terrifying consequence. If the silo is built around controlled perception, then escape may not solve the problem. Because a person can leave a physical prison while carrying the prison inside their mind. That means Juliet doesn't just need to find the door. She needs to determine which parts of her own understanding were shaped by the system. And that is a much harder escape. Now return to the original clue. The mirror. Why does this image work so well? Because you can stand directly in front of it and still fail to see the thing that matters most. You see yourself. You see the room. You see the reflection. But the mirror has a boundary. There is always something outside its frame. And perhaps that is exactly what the silo has done to humanity. It has created a frame called history, a frame called safety, a frame called reality. And everyone inside has been taught to stare at the picture instead of questioning who built the frame. But Juliet is beginning to look at the frame. And once she does, every assumption becomes unstable. The question is no longer whether the silo is hiding something. Of course it is. The question is how deep the deception goes. Because if the system controls what people see, what they remember, what they are told, and what evidence survives, then the final secret may not be hidden in a room at all. It may be hidden in the difference between what people remember and what actually happened. And if Season 3 pushes this idea further, the next revelation could be devastating. Because the person who discovers the truth may realize something worse than being lied to. They may realize that they have spent their entire life helping the lie continue. And that means the mirror was never showing them who they were. It was showing them who the silo needed them to believe they were. But there is still one question left. If someone finally breaks the mirror, what happens when there is nothing left to reflect the lie? What if breaking the silo's rules was never the real act of rebellion? What if the real rebellion was learning to question your own perception? Because by this point, the mirror theory leads us to a much darker possibility. The silo may not have been designed simply to keep people underground. It may have been designed to create a population that could never independently reconstruct the truth. And that is far more frightening. A physical prison has walls. A psychological prison has assumptions. The people inside the silo know there are walls. They can see them every day. They know they are trapped underground. But they may not understand how deeply those walls extend into their thinking. They have inherited rules, inherited fears, inherited histories, inherited explanations. And because those ideas were passed down for generations, they stop feeling like information. They feel like reality. That is the trick. The strongest prison is the one that eventually stops looking like a prison. And this is why Juliet matters so much. She doesn't simply resist authority. She keeps testing reality. Every time the official explanation fails to match what she observes, she doesn't immediately replace it with another belief. She investigates. She looks for mechanisms. She searches for physical evidence. She asks what happened before the current story began. That makes her different from almost everyone around her. Because the system can survive people who are angry. It can survive people who are afraid. It can even survive people who hate it. What it struggles to survive is someone who understands how it works. And Juliet is getting closer to that point. She is beginning to understand that every visible system may have an invisible system underneath it. The rules are only the surface. The technology is underneath. The technology may be connected to another layer. And underneath all of it may be the original purpose of the silo. That is the part nobody can safely reach. Because imagine discovering that the entire civilization was built on a lie. Not just one lie. A foundational lie. A lie so old that nobody alive remembers the original truth. At that point, revealing the truth doesn't simply change history. It destroys identity. And that may explain why the authorities react so violently whenever someone gets too close. They aren't protecting a secret. They are protecting the structure that depends on the secret remaining believable. That's not the same thing. If the silo's entire social order depends on people believing a particular version of reality, then one contradiction can become catastrophic. One object, one recording, one memory, one person asking the right question. That is all it takes. Because once people realize that one part of the story is false, they naturally begin questioning the rest. And that creates something the silo cannot control easily.
Curiosity.
Curiosity spreads faster than rebellion. A rebellion needs organization. Curiosity only needs one unanswered question. And the silo is filled with unanswered questions. That may be why the show constantly gives us fragments instead of complete explanations. The fragments are not just there to confuse the audience. They mirror the experience of the characters. We are trapped inside the same information problem. We know enough to suspect something is wrong, but we don't know enough to see the entire machine. We are standing in front of the mirror with them. We see the reflection. We see pieces of the truth, but we cannot yet see what is outside the frame. And this is where the theory becomes terrifying. Because what if the mirror isn't only symbolic? What if the silo's entire visual environment has been designed around the same principle? What people see, where they see it, when they see it, what they are prevented from seeing. Every one of those decisions can shape behavior. A person who believes the outside is deadly behaves differently from someone who believes the outside is survivable. A person who believes history is complete behaves differently from someone who knows it has been erased. A person who believes the rules protect them behaves differently from someone who realizes the rules protect the system. So perhaps the greatest achievement of the silo isn't keeping people underground. It is making them defend the structure that imprisons them. And that changes the meaning of characters like Bernard. He may appear to be one of the people enforcing the system, but what if he is also one of its products? What if he has spent so long protecting the silo that he no longer knows where protecting humanity ends and protecting the system begins? That distinction could become crucial. Because the most dangerous person in a controlled society is not necessarily the person who breaks every rule. It may be the person who realizes that the person enforcing the rules has forgotten why they exist. And perhaps that is why the deeper mystery surrounding the silo keeps pointing backward. Before Juliet. Before Bernard, before the current hierarchy, before the stories everyone accepts, there was an original decision. Someone decided humanity needed to be contained. Someone decided information needed to be controlled. Someone decided certain truths were too dangerous. But here's what changes everything. We have never been given a guarantee that the people who made those decisions were correct. We only inherited their conclusions. And inheritance is not proof. That may be the central message hiding behind the mirror. Don't trust the reflection simply because it has always been there. Don't trust the story simply because everyone remembers it. Don't trust the rules simply because breaking them has consequences. And most importantly, don't confuse seeing something with understanding it, because the silo may have mastered the difference between those two things. You can see the outside, but do you understand what you're seeing? You can see the records. But do you know who created them? You can see the history. But do you know what was removed? You can see yourself in the mirror. But do you know who decided what should be reflected? That final question may be the key to everything. Because if the silo was built to control perception, then the ultimate escape isn't walking through a door. It's recovering the ability to determine reality independently. And that could be what Juliet is actually fighting for. Not freedom from the walls. Freedom from the version of reality those walls created. Once she understands that, the entire conflict changes. The silo doesn't need to stop her from escaping. It needs to stop her from proving that the world outside the approved narrative exists. Because proof changes people. One person can be dismissed. Two people can be punished. A rumor can be controlled. But physical evidence is different. Evidence creates memory. Memory creates questions. Questions create doubt, and doubt destroys obedience. That is why the smallest object can become more dangerous than the largest weapon. The silo can destroy a person. It can destroy a room. It can erase a record. But once enough people have seen the same impossible thing, the system has a much bigger problem. Reality itself begins fighting back. And perhaps that is what the mirror has been warning us about all along. A reflection can be controlled. A story can be controlled. A screen can be controlled. But reality eventually produces something the system cannot perfectly manage. Contradictions. And Juliet is becoming the person who collects those contradictions, one by one, until they form a picture the silo never wanted anyone to see. And if this theory is right, then the biggest revelation of season may 3rd not be the discovery of another secret room. It may be the discovery that the silo's greatest secret was never hidden in a room at all. It was hidden in plain sight, inside the way people think, inside the memories they trust, inside the images they accept, inside the reflections they never question. The mirror wasn't hiding the truth. It was teaching us how the truth had been hidden. And once you understand that, the entire silo becomes one enormous reflection. A reflection designed to make humanity look at itself, while never looking behind the glass. So, maybe the final question isn't, what is outside the silo? Maybe it's much worse. Who is still watching from the other side of the mirror? And what happens when they realize Juliet can finally see them?